Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Cait Kremenstein's short story, In the Bad Times, which comes out of Women Recreating Classics, edited by Emily Hauser and Helena Taylor. So a couple of things before we get started talking about this short story itself. First, this was a contest-winning short story. That's how it made it into this collection. The Classical Association and Bloomsbury ran a creative writing competition for young people. Dedicated to discovering new talent and diversifying access to classics and its recreation, according to the introductory material here. And so Kremenstein's short story won. Apparently there was a massive amount of really, really good stuff, which I 100% believe. But this story was the one that was ultimately selected. And I can see why. It's a really, really good short story. The other thing, on a more sort of personal, random, arbitrary note, I knew that I was going to talk about this story today. That's partially why I've worn my Book of Kells tie. I knew that this is set in Ireland. I had not actually read Kremenstein's author bio in this collection, so I wasn't sure about this, but I had a strong suspicion based on the way that it is written that Kremenstein was from Ireland. And so I decided that I was going to wear one of my multiple Ireland shirts. So I have a couple of faux soccer jerseys from tpublic.com. They're not real proper soccer jerseys, but one is for the Republic of Ireland, the other is for Northern Ireland. And I was back and forth about which one I wanted to wear under this shirt. Like, you can't even see it. The t-shirt I'm talking about, you can't even see because I'm wearing a shirt and a jacket over it. But I ultimately decided to go with my Northern Ireland shirt. And when I got in this morning to read Kremenstein's bio, I discovered that she's from Belfast. So sort of serendipitously, I chose the right nation on the island of Ireland for the t-shirt that you cannot see to represent Kremenstein. That being said, without sort of diving too much into it and sort of speculating unfairly or perhaps problematically, my suspicion, based on the way that In the Bad Times is written and approached, is that Kremenstein is probably more likely to be a nationalist, an Irish Republican. She's probably more likely maybe to be Catholic, or of a Catholic background. Although the name Kremenstein to me sounds Jewish, but that may just be because I always want us to be doing good stuff. Although I also have ancestry from Northern Ireland, so I can claim Kremenstein as a ethnic relative one way or the other, right? But based on the way that In the Bad Times is written, I think it's probably pretty unlikely that she is a unionist. That is, that she favors Northern Ireland remaining part of the UK. Because the story has a very anti-colonial approach. It is a reworking of the story of Daphne. And in classical mythology, Daphne was a nymph. She was pursued by Apollo, and she did not consent to have sex with Apollo. Apollo, as is standard in Greek mythology, did not take no for an answer, so he pursues her, and Daphne sort of prays to be rescued, and she is transformed into a laurel tree, at which point Apollo takes the laurel as his symbol, right? Which is a pretty fucked up thing for him to have done, right? Like, she's fucking been transformed into a tree because she does not want to be with you. Maybe just let it go. But again, I'm not judging Apollo. I'm judging Apollo. Apollo, you suck in this story and in many other stories. Anyway, so this is the basis of In the Bad Times, but it is recontextualized to really the famine period in Ireland, the 1840s into the 1850s. And this was a period very much of British colonial rule. It was a period of violence by the British military and political establishment against Irish people. As the Irish became more impoverished, more desperate, more hungry, violence was increasingly necessary to maintain British colonial power and to ensure that the Irish could not rise up in an anti-colonialist revolt, an anti-capitalist revolt, etc., which would have made their material living conditions substantially better, right? But anyway, we'll put aside the sort of ongoing Irish American as well as Irish angst about the famine, right? So Kremenstein takes this story of Daphne, and she resets it into this period in which colonialism becomes aligned with sexual violence or sexual coercion. And of course, sexual violence has always been a part of colonial authority, right? One of the ways in which colonial rulers maintain their power is through violence of all kinds, including physical violence, cultural violence, psychological violence, and sexual violence, right? So we have that sort of intertwining, right? Where the character of Daphne, whose name is sort of respelled in what's maybe more a sort of Irish-y way, though I'm not 100% sure of that, Daphne, rather than the more traditional Anglophone spelling of Daphne. And language is incredibly important here, right? Kremenstein code switches within this story, building in pieces of the Irish language. I will read you some bits of this story. Fair warning, I do not speak Irish. And Irish is a very, very difficult language, in my view, for Anglophone speakers, in part because many of the letters produce very different sounds than they do in English. I did briefly try to learn Irish, and my head could not make it work. So when I read you bits and pieces of this story and come to something in the Irish language, I will read it badly as an Anglophone reader. I apologize in advance. I do that with full acknowledgement that the English language is a colonial imposition in Ireland, and that it was intended more or less overtly to wipe out the Irish language as part of a fundamental assault on Irish culture. And so I apologize in advance that I am reading this as an Anglophone reader. All that being said, right? So we have those alignments, right? That the British become associated with Apollo, the wielder of power and violence, and the Irish become associated, and not just the Irish people, but the Irish landscape on some level becomes associated with Daphne as the object of that violence, the object of that coercion, the object of that domination. So, for instance, we get this one bit a little ways in, and part of that, there's a recurring color palette to this story where, and we get it from the third line of the story, you are green where they are red, right? So the Irish characters and the Irish landscape is associated with green. Unshockingly, it is called the Emerald Isle for a reason. Ireland is notoriously green. And interestingly enough, while St. Patrick's original color association was blue, it was subsequently changed to green, right? St. Patrick was originally associated with the color blue, and then at some point, as part of a sort of Irish nationalist renegotiation of St. Patrick, he becomes associated with green, which is associated with Ireland. So we have that, and of course the red, the British Army's traditional uniform for basically from the English Civil War, the New Model Army under Cromwell, up into today for some units, right? Dress uniforms especially. So we have that sort of competition between colors, and they get aligned with these ideological and power positions. So we have, again, this very distinctive contrast between the ways in which the British and the Irish characters, particularly the second person address, it works, because this is a story written in second person, which is a very difficult approach to telling a story. Very difficult to do well, because it often ends up being quite awkward. But I think Kremenstein does it quite well. But you have this sort of sense of long-term suffering, punctuated by a very distinctive assault, right? So we get this bit. This is sort of reflecting on the generalized suffering of the famine period, the colonial period, etc., etc. The stones used to hurt. You're numb to them now. See your reflection in each muddy triptych, each milky pool, stumbling, hair streaming, eyes wide. You cannot ever wear a petticoat and twist your hair with a silver comb. You are no great beauty. You've known this, and you fancied that you could have been. They took this from you, too. What would have been fair now repulses you with its deathly pallor. Your ribs, sorry, that's bad Irish. There seem so many of them jutting out now, yearning to escape. Wrists rubbed raw, you can feel each tremor, each vein, each pulse. How many have you left? Seldom any now. Scarce any since you and your sisters, singing, always laughing. Where did that laughing girl go? Tassie in the bain. Again, sorry. Where to go to the field? Where to go to the field? Where to squabble over and where to start? You had abundance then, and you dug your hands deep into that soil, your land, your earth. And deep in the womb of this, your land, something was so very, very wrong. Soft rot and dead things forming a pulp in your hands. There's not much to say about what happened after that. Not much you remember. Androshul, the bad times. The pale ring of green around a sister's mouth, your own mortality clawing at the door until they forced you out and there was nowhere to go but the thought of your own cold death grinning madly in your face. No notion to sing any more, those in smug scarlet and brass buttons residing over it all. Right, so here we have a generalized depiction of suffering during colonialism and during the famine especially, right? The famine was caused primarily by a potato blight, which struck the primary staple crop of the island of Ireland in the 1840s. And because so much of the crops, so much of the crops that were not affected, things like wheat, which was grown in Ireland, things like fish that was harvested, etc., were shipped out of Ireland to England, to the United Kingdom, while the local Irish population was largely dependent on potatoes. Because those exports of food staples from the island of Ireland did not stop during the famine, many Irish people died of starvation. Many more people were displaced. That's part of the reason why the Irish diaspora is as extensive as it is around the globe, particularly in countries like the United States here, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, places like this, right? So we have that generalized depiction of suffering, but we also have a very specific individualized suffering, because we have one character, he, and this character doesn't have a name in the story. No one has a name in this story. But this is Apollo. And he does, there is a sort of mention of a name, but not a name that is the proper name, right? This is an understanding of the name iterated through the Irish language, something like Polladh. Polladh. Again, I don't know how that should be pronounced. And it means digging, penetrating, puncturing, something like that, right? This is the translation that Kremenstein gives us. This is Apollo, and apparently the character of Apollo in the bad times is sort of notorious for sexual and physical violence. And so he chases Daphne, the second person character of this story. She flees into the woods, and there is a sort of blending of Daphne's identity with the identity of Ireland itself as a place or a space, right? So, Daphne is fleeing, and it says here, despite it all, he is growing ever closer. Alanth, you are ready for your fate. You fear the tearing, the ripping from you something that should only ever be given. You stand your ground. You send your wish deep into this land as his red bleeds into the green, but you are not what they say you are. Aqua, you are not a part of this land to take and break and kill. You are this land. You are every bud and sapling and fawn on this emerald isle, your isle, not his or theirs. You are not perishable. You will not succumb to any blight. You will not let him or any man have you. The clover grows despite the rose's thorns. Throw your head to the sky, girl. Feel how the fronds blind him, needles pierce him, roots trip him, the bog drags him down. You are green. You are all of these trees, and you are the woman standing among them. When he closes his arms around you, he touches naught but bark and amber, no lips to kiss but waxy green grins, no beating under your breast, just the bird song and chatter of the forest. He falls to his knees in shock and dismay. Men like him cannot understand such things. There is no cause for sorrow. You are the forest, Aqua. You are free. And so, I mean, this, of course, is the Daphne story from mythology, right? She prays for escape and is transformed into the laurel, at which point she does not get sexually assaulted, which I guess is a good thing, but she's also now a tree, which may or may not be a good thing. That's sort of much more neutral. I guess it depends on your perspective. If you think that being a tree is a bad thing or a worse thing than being a nymph, then yeah. But if you think that being a tree is a better thing than being a nymph, you win. Cool. So we have this element of it, right? But we also have this sort of transubstantiation almost. I'm going to use a pointedly Catholic term there. We have this sort of transhumanist integration of the self into a larger environmental space, right? So this is a transhumanist or post-humanist perspective, a kind of transcorporeality in which the self is, the boundaries of the self in some way dissolve and make way into a larger connectedness with something else or with multiple other entities, identities, whatever it is, right? So in this case, it is a very specific version of transcorporeality or transubstantiation, a changing of one thing into another. And that is the dissolution of the seemingly self-contained individual into the environment that represents their identity, their rootedness in place. And what's specifically noteworthy about this is that the story itself refuses the idea that this is necessarily a change, right? The conceptualization, the conceit here seems to be, and I think this makes a lot of sense, from the perspective of a sort of post-colonial nationalist perspective, that the figure of the oppressed and repressed Irish person is simultaneous with and to the Irish landscape, right? That the oppression of the Irish people is the oppression of the Irish landscape and vice versa, and that the identity of the Irish people is fundamentally rooted in Ireland as space, as environment, as world,